Thank you very much, Hendrik, and thank you to everybody who made the effort to come in this morning. You know, I reflect that most conferences that I go to, and I think this is no exception, you usually find the biggest attendance either at the conference dinner or at lunchtime when there's free food available. So I'm quite comforted by the numbers that I see in front of me. I should also tell you that I am live streaming this in 360 degrees, so I'm doing a Shafi Ahmed. This is the camera that I'm using to live stream, and it's live streaming via my smartphone over the university Wi-Fi network. So it's been streamed to my Facebook page, and I hope that there will be a few people watching in different parts of the world. I don't normally pre-announce this because I've been so familiar with technology that I know things can go wrong, so I don't usually tell people when I'm going to do this. But the very first time I did it, it was for a luncheon for old people in the nearest village, and I just did it spontaneously, and it was watched live in Australia, Thailand, Lithuania and Brazil. So mind you, there were only 4 people watching it. They just happened to be in those countries. So I'm live streaming, and I'm also recording with my Ricoh Theta V in 360 degrees. This is the camera that you've seen me wandering about on the end of a stick, and it's not so good for live streaming, but it does provide good quality video and 360 degree audio. So after this conference, if you want a reprise of what you see this morning, you'll be able to get it accessible. So can I start by just asking you a question? How many people in this room are 70 years old or older? Hands up, anybody? You are? Well, you look very well for your age. Well, you just spoilt it, because I was hoping that I was going to be the oldest person in the room, but never mind. How many of you are younger than 50 years old? Okay, quite a lot of you. Okay, so a lot of what I'm going to show you and talk about, you will have had no experience of. But it's important in creating the context for my presentation, help you to understand one of the things that Shafi Ahmed mentioned in his presentation last night was about exponential change. And in the year that I was born and in my lifetime, I've seen exponential change. It's probably affected my life more than exponential change is currently affecting yours. So I'll get straight on. I've really got 2 objectives today. I want to make my presentation as entertaining, memorable and eye-opening as possible, but I really only have one learning objective, and that is to motivate you, to change you, even in the smallest way, to motivate you to want to really change the future. Not just your own future, but the future of the generations to come. In 1 hour, it's not an easy task. So I'm using a device that Charles Dickens used in Christmas Carol. Has anybody seen the film Christmas Carol or read the book by Charles Dickens? You know the story. The ghost of Jacob Marley visited Scrooge, and he was in chains, and he talked about the change that he forged in his life, and he summoned up 3 spirits: the ghosts of Christmas, past, present and yet to come. So today, when you think about my presentation, remember this picture of me in chains, the ghost of Wortley. Now, you know, literally, metaphorically, I do have chains, because I'm 70 years old, and you don't get to my age without forging a lot of chains. You know, I am the product of my lifetime's experience, the mistakes that I've made, the experiences that I have, and somehow that's paradoxically both empowering and enslaving. So everyone in this room has their own chains, partly brought about by their own circumstances, partly brought about by their experiences. So I want to take you on this journey through the past, present and future, and summon up the ghosts of learning past, present and yet to come. And the reason I want to do it is, to begin with, I want you to try and imagine that you're going back to 1950 and that you are the parents of this little boy with his knitted doll, and you're thinking about what kind of life your child is going to have. So take yourself back in time if you can. Think about the future of that child, what's likely to happen between 1950 and today. And then at the end of my presentation, just think about what life is going to be like for this little boy now in 2018. So a little bit of entertainment, maybe to wake you up. Does anybody remember Doris Day? Yeah, there's a few of you remember. Does anybody remember this song, Que Sera, Sera? Okay, well, I'm going to sing it to you, and I would like some form of torture, yes, after last night, but I'm going to sing it to you, and I'd like you to join in the chorus. Okay. When I was just a little boy, my mother asked me, what shall I be? Will I be handsome? Will I be rich? This what she said to me. Que sera, sera, whatever will be, will be. The future's not ours to see. Que sera, sera. Now there is a point to this, and that is one of the points is that, you know, this was a song that was a hit in 1956, over 50 years ago, and I still remember the words. Now, isn't that strange? I can't remember most of what happened yesterday, but I can remember the words to this song. But the other thing about this song is that it's really quite philosophical. You know, it's really a fatalistic approach, which is saying that, you know, whatever's going to happen is going to happen. You know, we can't see into the future. But this is what I'm asking you to try and do today. And if you put yourself in the place of my parents, okay, they didn't know what was going to turn out, but they wanted to shape my life. And so my parents' wish list in the 1950s, this is what their aspiration was for me, was that I would go through the education routine, primary school, grammar school, university. I'd have a professional career based on using my brains. My dad was a carpenter, an undertaker. He didn't want me to do what he did all his life. He wanted me to use my brains to earn a living. He wanted me, like so many people in those days, to have a career for life, have some security and good income. Obviously, he wanted me to be healthy, have a good family life, and have a responsible job, but very importantly also to have status and respect. So these were the kinds of careers that my parents had in mind when I was just a little boy. You know, they would have been great if they'd been a doctor. In fact, because my dad, part of his job was being an undertaker, I had my godfather, who was my uncle. He was a lay preacher, so he used to marry people. And so they hatched up a scheme where I could be perhaps a doctor. And as a doctor, I could bring people into the world. My uncle could marry them, and my dad could see them off. So they had the name for the firm that they were intended to set up was Hatch, Match and Dispatch. So they had a sense of humour. So I had aspirations as a young boy, and I had a dream job in mind. And these are the attributes of the job that I really wanted to do when I grew up. It's a job that requires subject matter knowledge, very responsible job, requires some judgment, teamwork, ability to analyse data and act on it, to build up experience, to have some sensitivity and awareness of what is happening all around, to have a good customer-centric sense, and to be able to communicate and work well with others. Now, I'm going to gamify my presentation, and this is a mechanic to help you concentrate. So I'm going to ask you questions at the end, and the correct answers will get a free copy of my book. So hopefully it will help you pay attention. I'm not going to ask you now for ideas on what my dream job was. I want to leave that to the end to see how my life turned out, and what happened to the job that I so much aspired to in those days. So this is the dream job, the characteristics of that dream job that attracted me so much. So now we're going back in time, and this slide is intended to perhaps make you think a little bit differently about technologies to enhance learning. These are the technologies that enhance my learning, right? So they weren't technologies that were developed for learning. You see a Humber Snipe car at the top. Well, we didn't have a car, but my uncle did. He was the only man in the street to have a car, and he had a car like that. 7 of us used to get in that car and go off to the seaside. There was my uncle and auntie, my 2 cousins, my mum and my dad and myself. It would never be allowed today. You get pulled up straight away. But this car was called the Bomb, and it didn't have electronic ignition, so my dad and my uncle, wherever we went, used to service the car. On a daily basis, they would service the car to give it a chance of getting to where they wanted to go and back again. So the car was started with a crank handle. I used to have to turn the engine to get the car going. But the thing about this car and the thing about the steam train is that they took me to new places and new experiences. And a lot of who I am now came about because those technologies provided me with this new experiences and helped me to learn. And it's the same with experiences with telecommunications technology. This was the kind of phone box that I had when I was young. It took 4 old pennies, and you dial the number, and then when you got connected you had to press button A, and if you wanted your money back and couldn't get through, you had to press button B. I made a mistake when I was a schoolboy and caused enormous panic in the house because my parents didn't know where I was, and it all because I couldn't use the phone properly. But my parents, and the equivalent I guess of Google today, my parents saved up to buy Encyclopedia Britannica. So we had a bookcase almost exactly like that. So if I wanted to know something, I'd go to Encyclopedia Britannica and try and find the book that gave me that idea. So when you talk about learning technologies, particularly experiential learning, it goes much broader than the kinds of things that I brought with me to show you today. And just give you, this is a wake-up sound. That's a steam train. In fact, it is that steam train. And for me, growing up in those times, the sound of this train whistle and the chuff, chuff, chuff as the train started off, they really are very emotional. And it's the same with the old technologies of telephone exchanges. So there's some sound effects here. This is what happened when you made a phone call. A Strata exchange would mechanically rotate the switches and make your connection. So going quickly through the years, these are the kind of experiences that really had a big impact on me and that are relevant to what I want to say today. The first thing was our television repairman. We didn't get a television until I was about 5 years old, and we had a television repairman called Mr. Mellor. And Mr. Mellor used to come round and replace valves in the television when it went wrong. It was a black and white television. When I grew up at primary school, one of the most influential teachers I had was Mrs. Derbyshire, and on a Tuesday afternoon we'd sit round the class and she'd read Biggles stories to me. And it was that gave me the love of storytelling and really an interest in doing what I do now with 360-degree technologies. I said my parents weren't well off, but unusually one of the subjects we taught at our school was Russian. And there was a school trip arranged to Moscow and Leningrad. This was 1966. Very few people went to Russia in those days. So we had a school party, we went by train, we went across the Berlin Wall, we went through Poland, East Germany, West Germany, Poland, to Moscow, and then we went on to Leningrad, and I actually watched England win the World Cup in Leningrad on a black and white television with a Russian commentator. But then I managed to get a scholarship with Postal Telecommunication, and where I did some of my training at a place called Hallwood House and another place nearby called Bletchley Park. You may have heard of Bletchley Park with the Enigma. Well, that is now almost absorbed within the city of Milton Keynes. Well, Milton Keynes didn't exist in those days. I watched the moon landing in 1969. I remember exactly where I was at the time on a training course. And when I went to university, I started at Birmingham University doing electrical engineering. So around about 1970, we were learning how to program in Fortran. And what we used to do is have to write the program out, send it to the computer lab. They would punch the cards out for the computer, and a week later I would get back a report that said fails to compile with a list of errors. So, you know, this is what, 20 odd years after when I was born. So the changes in those 20 years really technologically had really been quite small. When I was at university, I was really very fit. I played for the university football team, and my resting pulse rate at that time was 40. So when I got appendicitis, and which turned into peritonitis, my pulse rate only went up to 75. So when I went to the health centre, the doctor examined me, and it was really touch and go as to whether they would send me home or to hospital. And so they decided not to take the risk. They sent me to hospital. I had an examination and my appendix had burst. I got peritonitis. So I very nearly died as a result of a lack of technology in those days to properly understand. Now, my first contact and use for what we might understand today as learning technologies was when I was a management tutor at the Post Office Management College, and we had a videotape recorder in those days. Now, I was training first line supervisors to go into management, and because it was quite a boring job, I was always looking for something interesting to do, and I had this idea of using the tape recorder as a way of helping managers to understand the importance of body language. So I recorded some spoof interviews with myself as the manager and one of my colleagues as a work staff, and when I was doing an appraisal interview, I was doing all the angry body sign, looking bored. When I was doing disciplinary interview, I was relaxed and I was talking. So I played this video back without the sound, and I got them to think about what the situation was, simply from the body language and what they saw. So that was my first use of technology. But I left IBM as a I left British Telecom to have a stepping stone to having my own business, and I joined IBM and I became a marketing executive because I didn't have any experience of computing. I thought this was going to be the thing for the future, and I didn't have any experience of selling, so I became a computer salesman. I worked for IBM for 5 years before I started my own business, and this is an example of the machine that we sold in those days, IBM System 32, top of the range machine, 32K of memory and 27 megabytes of disk, and we used to sell that for £27,000. Can you imagine that? £27,000. I learnt a lot from those days. When I went into business on my own in 1984, I'd seen the way in which technology was changing and that people were investing in new technology, not to save money, but to provide themselves with a competitive advantage. So I set up a consultancy, and I wanted to prove to myself and the rest of the world, doesn't matter how small you are, there are ways of using technology to make you stand out from the competition. So I bought an early IBM PC that looks exactly like the one I had. It had 64K memory and 2 floppy disk drives, and that was £3,000. And with that, within a year, I'd gone onto a colour display, and the resolution of the colour display was CGA, which I think is 320 by 200 pixels. Can you imagine that? So I was designing presentations on the IBM PC and making my own 35mm slides for my marketing material. Could have been used for training. So there weren't really data projectors in those days. Everybody used overhead transparencies or 35mm slides. And so the technology available to make 35mm slides for larger companies was something, was a machine, a dedicated machine that cost £250,000. So I was able to do, albeit appalling quality, but on a IBM computer that cost £3,000. And then towards the end of the 80s, we had Prestel. And this was a television information system called View Data, and that operated over a modem that ran at a speed of 1200 bits per second, so not really broadband standard. But times moved on. My first portable was an Amstrad portable, looked like that, and I made my business became very successful out of one piece of technology. And it's a piece of technology that you will I almost guarantee you'll never have heard of, but it made me a significant amount of money. And it's that box at the end there. It's called DiskFax. And with DiskFax, you could put in a floppy disk from a Mac, a PC or Unix. You could tap out the remote DiskFax telephone number, and you would get an exact copy of that disk at the other end with 100% guaranteed data integrity. So you didn't need a computer, you just needed a telephone line. And so this gave me the idea of setting up the National Presentation Network. So I formed a partnership with the Pronto Print organisation, Print Copy Chain, and I persuaded eventually 100 franchisees to buy one of these to send me copies of their PowerPoint presentation. So customers would go to the shop, wherever it was in the UK, give them the floppy disk with PowerPoint slides on. It would be transmitted to our offices. We would image them and turn them into 35mm slides or overhead transparencies, and we would send them back so they got them back the next day. And within 3 months of starting the business, we're up to £10,000 a month in slides. So it was an idea that rapidly took off, but it was a bit of a quantum shift in technology at the time. And I invested in the forerunner of the digital camera. This is a Canon Iron from 1992. It had a resolution of 320 by 200. And that's a picture of me with my granddaughter. Printed out on a black and white laser printer. She is now 28. So you can tell the changes that have happened in that lifetime. So as time went on, I got involved in web conferencing and video conferencing, and in fact serious